Chaos erupted on live television just 1 minute ago, and the entire country is now talking. Financial expert Martin Lewis, known for his calm, fact-based approach, just did the unthinkable. He exposed Labour MP Lisa Nandy for spreading what he called shocking lies in front of millions. What began as a routine interview quickly spiralled into a political firestorm, as Lewis, usually reserved and methodical, completely dismantled Nandy's arguments with cold, hard facts. The studio fell into a tense silence, the viewers held their breath, and the internet is now ablaze. What was supposed to be another polished PR moment for Labour has turned into a catastrophic blunder. This moment may go down in political history, not just for what Lewis said, but for what it revealed about the state of Labour's leadership and its trust with the public. Let's unravel exactly what happened in this explosive on-air confrontation. The interview began like many others. A polished MP, seated confidently under the studio lights, ready to deliver Labour's carefully rehearsed messages. Lisa Nandy, a senior figure within the party, appeared unfazed as the cameras rolled. Her voice was calm, her tone assured. She spoke of Labour's commitment to working families, of fair wages, and responsible economic management. It was classic political theatre, broad, appealing phrases with little substance. But Martin Lewis, a man revered for cutting through noise, wasn't interested in theatrics. He listened intently, nodding at intervals, allowing Nandy to fully lay out her narrative before striking. Then came the moment that cracked the facade. Lewis, armed with a printed chart, asked her a direct question about Labour's proposed energy rebate scheme. Nandy's response was immediate, but vague. She assured the public that no family would be left behind, and the numbers speak for themselves. That's when Lewis leaned forward, his expression sharpening. "Actually, they don't," he interrupted. The mood in the room changed instantly. He pointed to the figures on his sheet, government data, verified independently, that showed a glaring shortfall in Labour's plan. According to Lewis, under the proposed model, millions of low-income households would receive significantly less support than under the previous Conservative package, a fact conveniently omitted from Nandy's glowing description. Nandy tried to respond, but Lewis cut through her with relentless clarity. "These numbers show that your policy leaves 3.2 million families worse off. You've either misunderstood the impact of your own plan, or you're deliberately misrepresenting it. Which is it?" The silence that followed was deafening. Nandy, caught off guard, stuttered through a half-explanation. But the damage had already been done. The audience could sense it. Something big had just happened. The trusted expert had drawn blood, and there was no turning back. What followed was even more damning. Lewis didn't stop at the energy scheme. He pivoted to Labour's tax pledges, specifically their claim that no new taxes would be introduced for working people. Holding up Labour's 2024 fiscal proposal, Lewis highlighted a hidden clause on page 47, one that referenced potential future levies to balance local authority funding. "You call that transparency?" he asked. Nandy, visibly rattled, insisted it was standard language and not a tax promise. But Lewis wasn't buying it. "It's a loophole. You say one thing in public and hide another in the fine print. That's not leadership. That's manipulation." The viewers at home could feel the tension. Nandy, once so poised, was now visibly shaken, her credibility crumbling under the weight of facts she couldn't dismiss. Social media lit up with reactions. Clips of the moment spread like wildfire. People weren't just angry, they felt betrayed. Labour, the party that once claimed the moral high ground, now looked cornered and defensive, and Martin Lewis, a man known more for spreadsheets than sparring, had become the unlikely voice of accountability. This first round was devastating, but it was only the beginning. Lewis had exposed the cracks. In the sections that follow, we'll dive deeper into how the confrontation escalated, the specific lies Nandy was caught in, and why this single interview could reshape the entire election narrative. Stay with us, because what happens next is even more explosive. The tension in the studio was palpable as Martin Lewis pressed on, his piercing questions leaving Lisa Nandy increasingly exposed. What started as a simple interview quickly became a political maelstrom. The audience, both in the studio and at home, could sense that this was no ordinary confrontation. Lewis, once regarded solely as a financial expert, had morphed into a relentless interrogator, and Nandy, once so composed, was beginning to crack under the pressure. It wasn't just the financial discrepancies that Lewis uncovered, it was the sheer scale of Labour's failure to deliver on their promises. As Nandy stumbled to defend the glaring flaws in Labour's proposed energy rebate scheme, she resorted to deflections and vague assurances that only deepened the hole she was digging. Lewis, with a calm yet cutting precision, relentlessly highlighted the specifics, how Labour's plan was not only insufficient, but also misrepresented to the public. He pointed out that the numbers she had referenced were outdated and did not reflect the recent changes in energy costs, showing that millions of households would still face hardship. Nandy, grasping at straws, tried to regain control of the narrative by pivoting to Labour's broader economic policies. However, Lewis wasn't letting her off the hook. He immediately countered her statements with a stark comparison to the reality of inflation rates, energy prices, and living costs under Labour's proposal. The numbers didn't lie, and he wasn't afraid to expose every flaw in their policy framework. At one point, he even asked her directly, "How can you expect people to believe your promises when the numbers don't add up? What's your plan for the millions of families who will be worse off?" Nandy was left fumbling for an answer, but there was no escaping the simple fact. The policies she was defending were built on shaky ground. As the minutes ticked by, it became increasingly clear that Lewis was more than just a financial commentator. He had become a powerful voice of reason, cutting through the political noise and holding Nandy accountable for the Labour Party's failure to offer real solutions. His calm, methodical questioning stood in stark contrast to Nandy's increasingly panicked responses. It was a masterclass in how to dismantle political rhetoric with facts and clarity. Then came the moment that truly set the stage for the avalanche of criticism Labour would face in the days that followed. Lewis turned the tables, shifting the conversation to a different aspect of Labour's economic policy, taxation. As Nandy continued to repeat Labour's mantra of no new taxes for working families, Lewis revealed a hidden section of the party's 2024 manifesto that sent shockwaves through the political world. He held up a page from Labour's tax proposal, which contained a little-known clause about potential future levies that could be applied to local authorities. This was a bombshell. It was a clear contradiction of Labour's public stance on taxes and a significant breach of trust with the electorate. The studio went silent as Lewis exposed the double standards in Labour's messaging. "You can't promise one thing in public and hide another thing in the fine print," he said, his voice steady but authoritative. "This isn't transparency, it's manipulation. And the public isn't stupid, they'll see right through it." Nandy tried to backpedal, claiming that the clause was standard legal language and that no new taxes were planned. But the damage had already been done. In that moment, the public's perception of Labour's credibility was shattered. They were no longer just failing to deliver on their promises, they were actively misleading the voters. The fallout from this exchange was immediate and intense. Social media erupted with fury as clips of Lewis's devastating questions spread across platforms. Political commentators, pundits, and voters alike took to Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to express their outrage at the Labour Party's apparent dishonesty. The hashtag #NandyExposed trended for hours as people shared their shock at how easily Nandy had been caught in a web of deceit. But the damage wasn't just limited to Nandy. It was a devastating blow to the entire Labour Party's image. The party had worked hard to position itself as the champion of ordinary working families, the saviours of the struggling masses. But in that moment, it was clear that the party was more concerned with political gamesmanship and spin than with delivering on their promises. The very foundation of their economic credibility was crumbling before the public's eyes, and it was all because of one devastating interview. As the interview drew to a close, the atmosphere in the studio was electric. Nandy, now visibly rattled, attempted to regain her composure, but it was too late. Lewis had left her with no room to manoeuvre, and her credibility had been irrevocably damaged. The entire episode was a masterstroke of political exposure, one that will be remembered as a turning point in the election cycle. In the aftermath, Labour's spin doctors scrambled to contain the damage. Press releases were hurriedly drafted, and talking points were sent out to party members. But it was clear that the party was on the defensive, unable to recover from the blows Lewis had landed. For many, this moment signalled the beginning of the end for Labour's hopes in the upcoming election. How could voters trust a party that had been exposed as dishonest and out of touch with reality? The impact of this moment extended far beyond the television studio. It set off a chain reaction that would reverberate through the political landscape in the weeks to come. As Labour MPs struggled to defend their party's position, the public's trust in the party continued to erode. And with the general election looming on the horizon, the question on everyone's mind was simple: can Labour recover from this devastating defeat? As we continue to break down the fallout from this explosive interview, stay tuned for more on how this moment could change the political future of the Labour Party forever. The days following the explosive interview saw Labour grappling with the fallout. The damage was done, and the public perception of the party was now irrevocably tarnished. What was once a steady political campaign for Labour had now turned into a defensive battle, with every move scrutinised, every statement analysed. The once confident party was now forced to scramble for answers, trying desperately to shore up its credibility. But the truth was undeniable. The damage inflicted by Martin Lewis had left a lasting scar on the Labour Party's reputation. Labour's leaders were quick to issue damage control statements, but the public wasn't buying it. Press releases rolled out at an alarming pace, each one trying to downplay the catastrophic impact of the interview. Party spokespeople attempted to reassure the electorate that the tax proposals, which had been so disastrously exposed, were simply a misunderstanding. They argued that the clause referenced by Lewis was standard legal jargon, unrelated to any future plans for new taxes. But the more they spoke, the more they alienated the very people they needed to convince. Their message came across as insincere, a desperate attempt to cover up a lie that had been exposed. Political analysts and commentators were relentless in their criticism of Labour. They called the party's handling of the situation a textbook case of political mismanagement. When you're caught in a lie, you don't double down. You don't hide behind legalese and semantics. You come clean and you start rebuilding trust, one expert commented. But rebuilding trust was not something that seemed achievable for Labour at that moment. With every attempt at damage control, they only dug themselves deeper into a hole. And the longer the crisis dragged on, the more it became clear. Labour had failed to manage the fallout from this disaster. The media frenzy surrounding the interview only intensified the pressure on Labour. Television stations, newspapers and social media platforms were dominated by the exchange between Martin Lewis and Lisa Nandy. Clips of Lewis's sharp questioning were replayed in an endless loop, each time reinforcing the image of a party caught in a web of deceit. The hashtag, Nandy Exposed, continued to trend, with new posts pouring in from all corners of the political spectrum. In the days following the interview, it became the focal point of national conversation. For many, it felt like the beginning of the end for Labour's credibility. But it wasn't just the media and the public who were turning on Labour, it was their own ranks. Behind the scenes, tensions were rising within the party. Some Labour MPs, once staunch defenders of the leadership, began to voice their concerns in private meetings. They questioned the party's strategy and its ability to recover from such a devastating blow. The cracks that had been slowly forming in the party's unity were now widening. The leadership, under the immense pressure of the scandal, found itself losing control over the narrative. Meanwhile, opposition parties saw an opportunity. The Conservative Party, which had been struggling to maintain its footing in the wake of its own scandals, seized the moment to hammer home Labour's failings. The Tories were quick to capitalise on the chaos within Labour, positioning themselves as the more stable and trustworthy alternative. The Labour Party cannot be trusted with the future of this country, Conservative MPs declared in speeches and press statements. They relentlessly pushed the narrative that Labour was a party of empty promises, incapable of delivering on their pledges. They even went so far as to accuse the party of being dishonest in their dealings with the public, echoing the very charges that Martin Lewis had exposed in the interview. The impact of this criticism from the Tories was immediate. Voters, already disillusioned by years of political turmoil, began to question Labour's ability to lead. Public opinion polls showed a significant dip in Labour's support, with many former Labour voters now expressing doubts about their ability to win the upcoming election. In a country where trust in politicians was already low, the interview had pushed many to the brink. Labour's internal polling began to show a worrying trend. Support for the party had dropped sharply, and the path to electoral victory was becoming increasingly unclear. Labour's leadership was in full crisis mode, but it wasn't just the party's public relations team that was scrambling. The political strategists behind the scenes, who had once been confident about Labour's chances in the next election, were now in damage control mode. The party's campaign strategy, which had focused heavily on social justice issues and promises of a more equal society, was now under intense scrutiny. The question that loomed large was simple: could Labour effectively pivot and recover from this devastating setback, or had they lost the trust of the electorate for good? In a last-ditch attempt to regain some semblance of control over the narrative, Labour's leadership decided to take action. They called for an emergency meeting, bringing together top campaigners, senior MPs and media consultants. The goal was to come up with a plan to restore confidence and win back the voters who had been turned off by the scandal. The meeting was tense, with many voices raised in frustration and anger. Some suggested that a complete overhaul of the II party's messaging was needed: new leadership, new promises, and a fresh approach. Others argued that the party needed to double down on their economic policies and push through with their original plans, despite the backlash. But no matter what path they chose, one thing was clear: Labour was in a fight for its political survival. The ripple effect of the interview continued to spread far beyond Labour's internal struggles. Across the country, ordinary voters were left questioning the integrity of the politicians they had once trusted. The interview had shone a bright light on the failings of one party, but it also served as a stark reminder of the fragility of political promises. Voters were no longer willing to take promises at face value. They wanted results, transparency, and accountability. As the days turned into weeks, Labour's leadership worked tirelessly to regain some ground, but with every attempt to recover, the party found itself facing an uphill battle. The damage had been done, and it was now a question of whether Labour could rebuild their reputation in time for the next election. With the media still fixated on the interview, and opposition parties capitalising on their every misstep, it was clear that Labour's road to recovery would be long and difficult. The public had seen behind the curtain, and what they saw was a party struggling to keep its promises and maintain its credibility. Whether Labour could turn the tide, or whether they would be permanently tainted by this scandal, remained to be seen. But for now, one thing was certain: the political landscape had been irrevocably altered by Martin Lewis's devastating takedown of Lisa Nandy. As the Labour Party fought to recover from the public relations disaster sparked by Martin Lewis's interview with Lisa Nandy, the implications of the scandal reverberated far beyond the party itself. The event highlighted a significant shift in the dynamics of British politics. In the days that followed, political commentators and analysts began to focus on a larger, more worrying trend: the growing distrust of politicians among the British public. The scandal had exposed the vulnerability of political figures, and it served as a stark reminder of how quickly public perception could turn against even the most established political figures. The impact on Labour's leadership was immediate and undeniable. While Keir Starmer attempted to steady the ship, the public's confidence in his leadership continued to erode. For many, the scandal underscored the deepening divide within the party, as well as the failure of its leadership to effectively handle the situation. Starmer's promises of transparency and integrity had been cast into doubt, and the party's internal battles now seemed more pronounced than ever. While Labour had hoped to build momentum ahead of the upcoming election, the interview had effectively put them on the defensive, forcing them to abandon many of their original campaign strategies. At the same time, the Conservative Party seized upon the opportunity to further cement their position as the alternative to Labour. Tory MPs and their supporters rallied around the idea that the Labour Party was unfit to govern, pointing to the Nandy interview as evidence of a deeper crisis within the opposition. The Conservatives' messaging was relentless, with the party framing the Labour Party as a group of out-of-touch elites who lacked the credibility to make good on their promises. They used the scandal to remind the public of the political chaos that had defined Labour's recent years, highlighting their own leadership as stable and trustworthy in comparison. This political rivalry between Labour and the Tories only intensified as the fallout from the interview continued. For many voters, it was no longer just about policy differences, it was about trust. The public's willingness to give politicians the benefit of the doubt had dwindled. A growing sense of cynicism began to permeate British politics, and the Nandy interview was a turning point in that shift. The exchange between Martin Lewis and Lisa Nandy had exposed not just the failings of one party, but the broader erosion of faith in political leaders as a whole. For voters who had long felt disillusioned by the system, this scandal confirmed their worst fears. Politicians, no matter their party, could not be trusted. In the midst of this political turmoil, smaller parties like Reform UK began to gain traction. As Labour's credibility faltered, Reform UK capitalised on the moment, positioning themselves as the voice of change and accountability. The party's leaders, once on the fringes of British politics, began to find a larger audience, particularly among those who felt disillusioned by the major parties. The rise of Reform UK signalled a shift in the political landscape, one where traditional party loyalties were no longer guaranteed. With the growing discontent among Labour voters and the rising prominence of smaller parties, the next general election was shaping up to be one of the most unpredictable in recent history. Meanwhile, Labour's internal divisions deepened. Behind closed doors, senior party figures were openly questioning their strategy. Some began to suggest that the party needed a more radical shift in its approach to governance, while others called for a return to its traditional roots. There were even whispers of leadership challenges, with some MPs wondering whether Keir Starmer had the strength to lead the party out of this crisis. The pressure on Starmer continued to mount, and it became clear that Labour's internal strife was far from over. The interview had not only exposed the weaknesses of the party's public image, but it had also revealed the deepening fractures within its ranks. At the same time, the media's role in shaping the narrative became increasingly apparent. News outlets continued to hammer Labour for their mishandling of the situation, with many accusing the party of failing to provide clear answers to the questions raised by Martin Lewis. The media coverage, which had initially been focused on the specifics of the interview, soon expanded to cover Labour's entire approach to transparency and honesty. Public relations experts and political analysts agreed that the interview had marked a pivotal moment in British politics, one that would have long-lasting consequences for the future of Labour and its leadership. As Labour's reputation continued to suffer, some MPs began to speculate about the future of the party itself. There were increasing fears that the scandal had damaged the party beyond repair, leaving Labour struggling to find its way in a political environment that was shifting rapidly. Even though Starmer had promised change, the events surrounding the interview exposed how deep the party's problems ran. For many, it seemed as though Labour was losing touch with the very electorate it had once represented. The once proud party, which had been at the forefront of British politics for decades, was now on the defensive, fighting to regain the trust of voters who were increasingly turned off by its inability to provide clear, honest answers. As the political fallout continued to unfold, the consequences of the scandal began to affect the broader political discourse in the UK. Public debates shifted from policy issues to questions of trust and accountability, and politicians across all parties were forced to confront the reality that their words and actions could be scrutinised at any moment. The scandal had highlighted the fragile relationship between political leaders and the electorate, and it served as a reminder that even the slightest misstep could send a party tumbling into crisis. Looking ahead, the future of Labour remained uncertain. The scandal had revealed the party's vulnerabilities, and it had opened the door for other political movements to challenge its dominance. Reform UK, along with other smaller parties, saw a window of opportunity to capitalise on the growing dissatisfaction with the traditional parties. While it was too early to say whether this would translate into electoral success, the rise of these alternative movements signalled a shift in the political landscape, one that could reshape the future of British politics in profound ways. For say, now, Labour's focus was on damage control, but the bigger question remained. Could they ever recover from the aftermath of Martin Lewis's takedown of Lisa Nandy, or had the party's credibility been permanently shattered? As the election loomed closer, the pressure on Labour to prove its worth was mounting, and the political future of the party seemed more uncertain than ever before. As the political storm continues to rage following Martin Lewis's explosive takedown of Labour MP Lisa Nandy, one thing is clear. The future of British politics is at a critical crossroads. The fallout from this dramatic encounter has left Labour reeling and raised more questions than answers. Will Keir Starmer and his party be able to recover from this damaging blow to their credibility, or is the rise of smaller parties, like Reform UK, inevitable? The stakes have never been higher. The next general election could reshape the political landscape in ways we've never seen before. But the real question is, how will you respond? Are you ready to witness the political upheaval that is about to unfold? Don't miss out on the most pivotal moments of this political drama. Stay informed, stay engaged, and make your voice heard. Hit that like button, subscribe for more updates, and share this video to keep the conversation going. We want to hear your thoughts. Do you think this scandal will be the downfall of Labour? Will smaller parties like Reform UK rise to power? The future of British politics is in your hands. Join the discussion and be part of the change. This is just the beginning.